You're on air?
Yep, so whenever you're ready. Let me give you a little clap or something.
Okay.
Start out saying your name.
Yep. So I'm Michael Phair, and I was born in Wisconsin, but I've lived in Canada a couple years in Calgary, but probably 40 years now in Edmonton. So this is a little bit about my experience and my work and with the queer community in Edmonton, which goes back to the late 70s, 80s and onward. Um, I was in Calgary because I had applied for a job at Mount Royal College, which I did get. And so I spent 2 years there teaching in Mount Royal College. And then I got a position with Alberta Education, also, but here in Edmonton, specifically in early childhood education and programs that they had, which was my particular background, and worked there for 5 to 6 years. Spent a lot of time traveling around northwest part of Alberta because I covered a geographical area for the province at that time, and spent time with at schools, with parent groups, sometimes school boards. It kind of depended on the program and who was running it, et cetera, and that as well. And I also did workshops for the department as well at different places in west of Edmonton, White Court, and I was also down to Ponoka and out as far as Jasper actually as well. Um, that went on and till 19 it would be 1983 uh, when I went to San Francisco to school, to San Francisco State University, to get a degree in early childhood education and children with special needs, which was the area that I was most involved with. And it was an interesting time and an interesting experience. Um, so I moved to Edmonton in 1982 with the provincial government in the Department of Education, and that was my opportunity to settle in a bit here right where I am sitting right now. I've lived here ever since that time, and with that, I started to get to know the community a bit better, particularly the queer community. Initially with GATE, Gay Alliance Towards Equality, which is a nonprofit organization that was one of the few operating in Edmonton at the time. They were downtown on 104th Street, and I went down there and met some folks that had a library for getting material, and a couple of people that I got to know quite well, and have been good friends ever since that. Also was the opportunity to find out what else was going on in the city and what kind of where bars might be and things along those kinds of lines. And found out about the Pisces Bathhouse, which was here on 109th Street downtown. And the bathhouse is a place, of course, where men like myself, gay men who were gay, went supposedly to exercise. Really, it was primarily to meet other people for sexual purposes, primarily. And so I was at the Pisces Bathhouse, and that was the night that there were the bath raids that took place in Pisces. The bath raids, which there is a whole lot of other information about, I'm going to just kind of say a couple of smaller things about it. The police raided the premise at approximately midnight that day. There were quite a few, I think there were 53, 56 found-ins. We were labeled people who were there in the premise. We were all photographed by the police. And the court officials that they brought with them to the Pisces Bathhouse. We were also given a summons, and we were charged under the criminal code of being found-ins in a bawdy house. We were also taken to the courthouse that night And by that time it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. They took us in paddy wagons, and that started the whole process of people being charged, dealing with the courts, etc. And that, as I said, there's a great deal of information and videos that's available about that without me going into too much detail. Well, okay, so after that night was over, which by that time was almost 7 o'clock in the morning, it became apparent to myself and to everybody there that we all were going to have to deal with the charge, which was a criminal charge, and go either plead guilty and then go to the courthouse and get whatever sentence they gave to you, which would be primarily money, but could be a couple other things, or you could plead not guilty. And I decided to plead not guilty, as did another 8 or 9 people out of the total number as such. And I pleaded not guilty because I had been following the raids, bathhouse raids in Toronto, and had read a little bit about what had happened and how they had been able to keep the courts not going ahead with the cases, and the big part was that they were able to get the owners of the bathhouse in Toronto to plead not guilty, and so they couldn't prove then that individuals who were there were in a bawdy house, because they couldn't prove that the building they were in, the bathhouse, was a bawdy house. In Edmonton, the owners of the Prices in the next by the next week, Friday I think it was, pleaded guilty that it was a bawdy house. They were fined a significant amount of money, some other repercussions that came with that as well. So the majority of people pleaded guilty at that point. They went to court and were either given a fine or whatever else. Some of us still pleaded not guilty, ended up working with lawyers. I had a lawyer who took on the first case that went before the court, and that was in August, a couple months after. And I attended that, as well as a couple of other trials, and saw what was happening and what information the police had and what they said, and et cetera, et cetera. They were found guilty. And when it came to my turn before a judge, my lawyer said, essentially, you've watched the others, you know what it's about, you might as well do it yourself. You don't need a lawyer with you. So I did, and I have to say it was one of the toughest things I've ever done. I don't know quite why I decided that I would do it, but I did. I shouldn't say that. Partly what my lawyer had said, not only to me but to others, is that if you go and found guilty, then we'll go and take to the appeal court, and thought that there might be a better opportunity that the appeal court would say something different. So that was part of the reason. The trial itself was like the others. I didn't have much new to add. Yeah, I was in it. They had pictures of me in it. They had information that I'd been there before. They showed pictures of the inside of the place. They didn't have any pictures of anybody except as individuals. There was never any charges that anyone had alcohol or drugs or were doing anything that would have been sexual as such. But it was enough because you were there. Essentially, the criminal code indicated you just needed to be on the premises at the time that it was a bawdy house. So I was found guilty. My lawyer then, with some additional work, appealed to the next level of court, and that's all done by lawyers. I'm not involved at all. I provided the information, but my lawyer was the only person meeting with a judge then at a higher court, and that the decision on that was almost a year later. It was the following year, September, when that the judge ruled that I was not guilty, and I had no and to remove anything that said that I was from the police records of the court. But by then, the situation had changed in terms of the raid was a year before that. The first court cases took place in August of that year, and many people had kind of forgotten about that. However, what was different was that it had quite an impact on the queer community and on the city as a whole. I think that before the raids, there was a sense that if you were queer in Edmonton or gay like I was, and you stayed kind of below the line and didn't make much noise and people didn't know much, and we would be fine and nothing to worry about. This changed that drastically. That in fact, 50 some folks, or 60 in the end, with counting the owners and all the rest, were charged and found guilty, paid fines, had court cases. And I think, excuse me, it really broke that myth that if you were quiet and good, everything would be fine. So, in my case, after having lost at the court, my lawyer took it to the upper court and argued it in front of a judge there. That was only between her and the judge, and I was not involved except information I provided was not at that or whatever. And the ruling from that judge did not come down until the following year, September. So it was nearly a year later. We knew it was going to be late, but the judge ruled that I was not guilty, and the charge needed to be removed from my record, kind of thing of that as well. So I have no criminal record, nor did I. And I would say that part of the reason that we worked hard to do that is I did know that if you have a criminal charge on your record, it goes with you, kind of thing in that, and it runs into all kinds of issues in terms of employment and other things as well. So I was fortunate that happened. I do think, though, that the other things the other kinds of things that happened as a result of the raids were significant. I think, first of all, for the local queer community, it kind of broke that myth that if you were quiet and stayed below the radar, everything would be fine. That wasn't the case anymore. And second, I think with the general public, I think you could have asked almost any Edmontonian whether there were gays and lesbians in Edmonton, and they would have said no. Well, that all changed. This was a big media event. It was all in newspapers, radio, TV for days at the time of the raids. And then again, the first trials that took place, they were public. Anyone could go to them, and the media did as well. That was all public again. And so I think there was that change on behalf of the general population. In terms of the community, what occurred was initially a group to try to fight and assist people like myself who were having to go on trials. But I think the other big part was there was much more individuals and groups that started to form. And so we saw groups that were connected with churches like Dignity, and the Anglicans had a group, etc. The sports groups grew like topsy-turvy. Not my strong point, but many different sports, softball, volleyball, badminton, hockey, you name it. Of groups in that. So there were a couple groups that were at the Oliver School in this area of the city where they practiced, and elsewhere, and some of them became part of city leagues as well, which had never happened before. We also, in a bit of a protest, decided that we would take part in those days, in Klondike Days, which was the big event of the summer. And one of the first aspects of that was the Klondike Days raft race. So we built a raft, which is putting it nicely. And we had a little motor on it as well. And it was basically barrels that kept us afloat. And we built with it a sail, and we had a big sail that was a great big pink triangle that said the gay 90s on it. And then 4 or 5 of us were on it to go down the river and the event. And the raft race was held for many years, every year, and there were probably 50, 70 boats that took place in it, rafts of one sort or the other. Companies who made a big deal about it had a big boats kind of thing and that, and they also had a ton of water that they squirted at everyone. We didn't know a thing. We didn't have a clue what we were up to, so we didn't have any of that. And we were, this little boat kind of raft with a pink sail, and then 5 or 6 of us on there. I was, and with the theme of gay 90s baths house. I was a rubber ducky. We said the song "Rubber Ducky" was famous at that time. I was a rubber ducky. A couple of others were different characters on it, and we got nearly drowned. Not really, but everybody squirted water at us. But we did it. We were on the front page of the Edmonton Sun the next day on the Monday. And and we were the only ones on the from that raft race that were in the media in visually at all.
To the members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and two-spirit community, both across the public and within our service, on behalf of the Edmonton Police Service, I am sorry. We are sorry. We acknowledge, apologize, and take responsibility for our past wrongdoings and what they have done.
The raids took place after midnight at some point. I actually was sitting watching TV, and I remember that out of the corner of my eye, I saw a number of people kind of running down the hallway in lights without realizing what that was, and just kind of being startled. It was not long after that, in fact, in 1983, that I took a year off from work and went to San Francisco State University to get another degree in early childhood special ed. So in 1983, in September, I went to San Francisco to go to school at San Francisco State University and get another degree in early childhood special needs, children with special needs. AIDS had also been found in the U.S. in primarily New York, San Francisco, some major cities there, and I was going to a city where it was a very big issue, and so in San Francisco was the first time that I really started to get to know what HIV and AIDS was and how it was affecting gay men in particular, but the queer community overall. And in fact, when I went to San Francisco, I boarded with another fellow who was gay, and I think the third day I was there, he had a call about someone and a funeral to go to, and he said to me, I've been to a number of funerals, it's just so difficult, and I said, well, I'll go with you. So I went to that funeral, which was the first funeral that I'd gone to that someone had died of AIDS, and it was in San Francisco, and started to realize how this was going through the community, and it was a horrible, terrible time for folks medically, and people died. It was all, that was happening all over. In San Francisco, every day there were more that died, and the numbers in the hospital were astronomical. And this friend of mine probably went to another dozen within the next year, kind of thing, in that as well. So that was one of the things that I also got slightly involved. I did join a group there that was doing some things to support people, not directly. We were doing some stuff about literature and that a little bit, because I was a full-time student as well, and there for a year to get the degree. But I lived in the Castro area, where all the talk was about AIDS and all kinds of stuff happening with it, and then. In July, I came back to Edmonton, actually the very last days of June. I'd finished the degree, I was done, and I didn't stay in San Francisco. I came back here. I probably could have gotten a job there, but decided I wanted to come back here to Edmonton, where I am right now, and did. And so those last couple of days of June, 1984, I had a group that came to my place for Canada Day. And we celebrated. We had a dinner here, food late in the day, fireworks, etc., and that. And with many folks, and with me having just returned, a number of people asked me about what I was doing, and they asked about AIDS and that because I saw of it. And up to that point, there had not been any identified cases in Edmonton as such. And I hate to say it, but before, at one point, and this was actually before I went to San Francisco, the media asked me about AIDS, which I knew practically nothing, and I said, "It'll never come to Edmonton, too cold. It'll never come here." I was wrong, very wrong, kind of thinking that too. So after that celebration, then on what would be the 2nd of August, 2nd of July, I had a phone call from someone in the media, I believe the Edmonton Journal, asking me, saying that what we were doing about AIDS, because they had the first case was identified at the U of A hospital, they'd been identified. And of course, we weren't doing anything, but one of the other people that was here and became part of our organizing group, Walter Cavalieri, was involved with GATE, and they had called GATE initially, and asked the same question, and he said for them to call me because I talked about it here with them and others, and that's how they got a hold of me and why. I was perhaps smart enough, or whatever, that I indicated to whoever called, "Oh, we're working on it. We'll get back to you," knowing that we were not working on it. We maybe would get back eventually. What I did do, though, is I called Walter, and then I called a couple of other folks as well. And we met the next day, which I think would be the 3rd, and then started the trip down what became the AIDS Network, AIDS Edmonton now. The AIDS Network of Edmonton is initially we started, and which started around this table. Where the journey for me, specifically with AIDS in Edmonton, began was on Canada Day. I had just gotten back from San Francisco, where I had seen a lot in that, but talked about it with friends here. I had a group here in the evening for dinner. Then we walked down to watch the fireworks down in the River Valley, kind of thing, and didn't think much more about it. The next day, one of the people who I talked to, Walter Cavalieri, who was involved with GATE at the time, Gay Alliance Towards Equality, and was kind of the main person organizing it, had a call from the media, I think it was the Journal, asking him what we were doing because the first case in Edmonton had been identified on the 1st at the U of A hospital. He said that they should call me, because I was the one that talked about it. And of course, I wasn't doing anything. But I had a call from the media on the 2nd day of that month. And I indicated that we were working on it. We get back to him, the caller, which we weren't doing anything at that time. But then that evening, or the rest of that day, in the evening, I called excuse me, Walter, Liz, Messiah, Brian Chittick, and I think one other person that we had as well at that time, that to come and meet here, which they did around this table on the 3rd, that following day, kind of thing. That would have been July 3rd. And we then, around the table, talked about what was going on and what we can or should be doing. It was really, when I think backwards, it was really an amazing conversation and how much we did think through. So among the decisions we made is that we needed to set up an organization. Liz and Walter both said that it should be one where it's not just us by ourselves as the queer community trying to deal with this. It needed other organizations and groups needed to take part in dealing with AIDS. So we call ourselves AIDS Network of Edmonton, and that was a very deliberate decision we made, so that health professions, education, etc., we could not do, and housing, we could not do all of that by ourselves, nor should we try to do everything. Instead, we were able to put together quickly what we thought would be some of the major things that we would do. And some of that came from the experience of what we knew elsewhere, and some of it was what I had experienced in San Francisco, that our group would need to be, in fact, those who would provide the most support to persons who had HIV, not medical, but life supports, helping people get to places, grocery shopping, being friends with them, whatever. And that would be a really significant one. The second one was education, that we provide information to gays and lesbians about AIDS and what it was all about, what you could do to prevent it, and to the general public, who were likely not going to be real happy with all this, and with gays and lesbians kind of thing, that as well. And then that we would need to include particularly people in the health field, nursing, doctors, etc., specialists, and get to make sure that people were receiving the health care services they needed, and that we would have to advocate, because all this was going to cost money, and that we would have to be doing that as well. So that, in essence, became kind of the form we had. We also said that we needed to expand and grow the organization very quickly, and that our best option at the moment would be to become kind of a committee under GATE, which already existed. And Walter was the head of that organization. He said, yeah, we could be a group within GATE to start to deal with AIDS in Edmonton. And so then we got to work, and we did a lot real soon. Much sooner than I remembered, I have to say, till I looked at it. So one of the first things we did, which was on August 13th, so that was like a week and a half afterwards, is we sponsored an AIDS forum, and that here in Edmonton, and it was with the AIDS Network, a GATE committee. And we had Dr. Romanowski, Dr. Tyrell, probably myself, that did this, and we did it at what then was the Phoenix Theater in their space. They no longer exist, that space and such. But that was an information session primarily that we did for gays and lesbians. So that was like a week and a half after that. The other that we did, which was much more fun, the kind of thing that, because I don't want to leave, because there were things, is we didn't have any money to do anything either, kind of thing that as well. So in August, the 18th of August, on Saturday, we had Alice's High Tea Party, which we did in the River Valley to raise some money and awareness. One of, I think it was myself, knew a fellow who I knew quite well, living fairly close here. It was also gay, who worked for the Edmonton Public School Board in their drama area, basically not performing, but with costumes and all the rest. And so we talked about what to do and came up with something with Alice, and he was the one that said, we got all those costumes. I can get them all. It's summertime. He said, I know where to get them, kind of thing. That. So we then put together Alice in Wonderland with the different characters and the costumes. We set up croquet. We had tea and little cucumber sandwiches we took down to the river valley. And out in the park, we charged people not much, and at $5, a suggested donation, actually, kind of thing. And that is, as we had, it was at Victoria Park, and people came. The characters performed a bit, played croquet, and I can't avoid that of course, I was the Queen of Hearts. And that year at Christmas, some friends of mine gave me this gift of the Queen of Hearts. So that was our first really kind of public event like this, and one to raise money. And we did. We raised, I think, it's hard to remember exactly, but I think we raised about $350 or something like that, which in those days sounded like a lot, and especially for a new group like us that didn't know anything what we were doing. And when I think of all the work that went into it, I can't believe we made any money, kind of that, but we did, and we had a good time. We were fortunate that the weather was good. The other that took place is the first person with AIDS in town, Ross Armstrong, attended later on. He came as Alice in drag, kind of thing, in that tough drag, and that was the first time that most of us knew who he was, or knew the name of the person. The first time that he came to something that we were involved in. Eventually, Ross, we got much more familiar with Ross as time went on. But that was the beginning of it. The network grew and fairly quickly. In terms of numbers, we ended up, I think, it ended up in the right term. I think over the next couple of months, we probably had another 50 or 60 volunteers. And we were meeting then we met a couple times here, but we got far too big. And then we met at Gate primarily, or a couple other places, I think at Flashback. No, or Boots, I can't remember. Some place, one of those places that we met, because there were quite a few of us coming. And that's when we also had people, part of our organization, that had some contact with people in the medical field, so that somebody knew Dr. Barbara Romanowski. A couple of us did not, and got her involved. Knew Lauren Tyrell, who was the main person at the university that was becoming involved in AIDS treatment, and so Larry Jewell, who worked at the hospital as well as a doctor, a different area, knew him and got in touch, and so we started to work with those folks, and they started to work with us, because we were the ones who were going to do the support of individuals outside the medical field, kind of thing, that as such, which we started, and we worked at training people and the rest to help that as well. There were plenty of situations that were very tough. One of them was this is Ross Armstrong with myself, and this is when we were opening an office, kind of in that. Ross was identified actually on the 1st of June, 1984, and he died 2 years later, exactly on June 1st, 1986. Almost no one with AIDS lived longer than 2 years in that time. They all died. Many much faster, or much and very quickly, or in a number of months. And we, as a group, were having to deal with that. And I would say that for example, I have one of the persons who I knew personally quite well. I had a call saying that he was in the hospital here in Edmonton, and I then that day or the next day went to see him, and he had AIDS, and the presenting was a very viral form of tuberculosis, TB, and when I went to the hospital, some of the hospital staff would not take the food into his room, and so I took that in. I also helped to clean the room there, and talked with him, and about how he was and the rest, and what was going on, health wise, and then I, went home or whatever. So then a couple days later, on Saturday morning, on a lovely sunny day, near noontime, I went to see him. And I went up to the floor where he was. I went in the room, and he wasn't there, and the room was all clean and all the rest. I thought maybe moved him somewhere else. One of the staff caught me as I was in there and said that he died that night, and which was a shock. He was not well. It certainly did not seem to me that at the time that he would die that quickly. One that never doesn't know about it. Anyway, it was tough. And it was also tough because he has no relatives in this country at all. No one in Edmonton as well. So it became then, how is he going to be buried, or what will happen with his stuff, and the apartment that he was living in. And I was somewhat involved with a couple other friends and other people that knew him. He did have a sister living in Montreal that they were able to get a hold of, which she was unable, and she couldn't come out, and she was unable and had not had a great deal of contact anyway with him. So made the decisions about burial, some kind of a little ceremony with it as well, and then closing up his apartment and the rest. And we were primarily a small, for in this particular situation, of men that were late 20s, early 30s, never expecting that we'd be dealing with people dying. That never crossed most of our minds. And then also figuring out how to do it. It was a jolt. Additional, and the numbers grew as happened everywhere across North America and around the world. And everybody died. There were very few people that lived more than 2 years. And we had volunteers that we had trained to work with, help train with someone. And even today, I just can't believe how well we did. And you knew when you worked with person X that whatever you did, they were going to die, kind of thing. That no one lived that. And so you helped in every way you could, tried to make it a little better for them, but they still died, and that. And knowing that from the beginning, how that affects you, and how you have to be able to realize that's the milieu that you're in, and you have to find the wherewithal and courage and sense of caring to be able to do that. I would say that we had quite a number of women that were part of the group. Many of them in the healthcare field who had much more understanding about a lot of this, and were certainly extremely helpful. Everybody that wasn't in that field to help people, kind of thing in that as well. But it still meant that everyone died. And I'll never forget a couple of those. I think everybody like myself that was involved. At that point, I was the head I was the chair of the board, and we had other folks. But we didn't have any staff that we were paying. Everybody was volunteers. We have things that really kind of were particularly tough to deal with. And so a young fellow that I knew, they were all young, but the young fellow I knew, who was probably 23 or 24, and I'd gotten to know before, fairly well. And I had a call that he was in the hospital. I was surprised. I didn't know that he was sick, and he likely had been sick for some time, but nobody knew, or nobody didn't say anything. And he died within a couple days. He'd come to Edmonton a couple of years before from a rural area in Alberta. Came with a family, had like 5 or 6 brothers and sisters and parents. His parents didn't know he was gay. They didn't know he was ill. They didn't know he had died. We had to call and tell him all of that. We had to work with them to have some kind of where they were going to bury. I mean, I remember them showing up with the kids, and trying to grasp that they had a son who was dead, and about burying them and some kind of service or whatever. We made arrangements for a place where he was taken from the hospital. Done that. We also helped with the burial then, and then we put together a little ceremony, and we actually had one of the community halls in the city for and about him that many of us and his family was at. It still brings tears to my eyes. It was just so tough. And terrible for the family, incredibly difficult. It's certainly tough for us as well, and doing things that we never expected we would have to do. But they needed to be done, so we found the ability and the courage to do it, even though it was not easy, and we were having to do that a great deal. And that was all part of the AIDS network in that time. As I move into a little bit further on in history, the name of the organization, which was AIDS Network of Edmonton initially, is now HIV Edmonton. It's the same group. It's just the grandchild of the beginning. And then after 25 years, they did a book that has a fair bit. I talk about all the stuff I've already talked about. List has a number of other people who were particularly involved. Liz was part of that early group. Here's another doctor, Colin Ciccone, who was with public health. Here's Barbara Romanowski, who was a godsend, ran the sexual infectious disease clinic, and she was the only one that knew anything much about AIDS in Edmonton, and she almost anyone in Edmonton that was or thought they were positive went through her offices, and it's wonderful. Charles Bidwell, who just died a couple of years ago, was is gay, had been married, single by that time, had a partner, and he ran the Metropolitan Church. He did a number of religious stuff. His partner died of AIDS relatively early, it was a very his partner had sarcosis, legion openings of skin all throughout his body. It was a horrible time. He died. Some other folks, Val Gervais, who has a social work background, Mickey was part of it, and on it goes of the different folks that are there. I didn't say and should add that by exactly 2 years, we started in 84. Ross Armstrong died in 86. By that time, he'd moved back to the town that he grew up in near Ottawa with his sister and family. I kept in, not just me, but I kept in contact by phone with him. And our group sent one of our volunteers to be with him the last couple of weeks to help, because he was, he was just, deteriorating entirely. He was probably down to about 85 pounds at that point. Everything was bad. I could hardly hear him when we talked on the phone as such, and that as well. And so he died on Canada Day 2 years later. I got a call that day. I decided not to say anything until the next day. And then we had a celebration here. He was buried out there, but we had a celebration of his life that we organized and put on as well with that too. So a lot of that is mentioned in the book. I want to add that in the work of this and the fact that we needed money besides what we were doing, and we raised that little there. The first money that we actually got was from the Court of Wild Rose, the drag queens, kind of thing, and that. And I'm one of those people. I got a Citizen of the Year award for them in 1983. 84 kind of thing in that. I've never been part of the drag queens as such and that too. But they raised about $800, which in those days was like for us $1 million with having no money, kind of thing in that as well. And with the money they raised and what we had here, and we got a small grant through the one of the foundations in town that doesn't exist as it did in those anymore. That we had enough money to rent a space, so we could that, and we had somebody on our board that was involved with real estate and around. And as soon as any place we were looking at found out who we were, what we do, they wouldn't rent to us as well. Because we were gay and lesbian, and also because of AIDS was seen by the general public as terrible thing, and people die and we don't want to get it, and there was a lot of, just like with the pandemic we've just been through, oh, you get it, someone coughs on you or whatever, none of which was possible, but there was that, or you get it from mosquitoes, they bite someone and then they bite you. We actually did posters about how mosquitoes can't do it. But anyway, so not finding a place to move to, I had a phone call out of the blue from somebody with the Edmonton Journal saying, "So what else is new? What are you guys doing?" And I said, "Well, we got some money for to rent a space, but no one will rent to us." And so they did a story on that in the Journal. And it was a fairly major article kind of thing in that. And after the article ran, I had a call from Father Bill Irwin, who was the head of Catholic Social Services, who I did know. I'd known him before through some other work I was doing in my real job. I'm talking about. I knew him from that, and said he read about it and said, "Why don't we talk about it?" And I said, "Fine." So I met with him, a couple other people, a couple other organizations, and talking. No, sorry, I'm mistaking that altogether. The Journal ran an article in that about the fact we couldn't get any space, and out of the clear blue, I had a call from a person that works with the city of Edmonton, a woman, in the land and buildings area, and she said, the city has buildings that we rent out to nonprofit groups. And I said, "You do?" I didn't have any idea. I said, "So what do I need to do?" And she gave me the name of the city staff person that I needed to call, which I then followed up with. And our first office was on the second floor of a building that no longer exists downtown, right near the police station or the law court's office in that area, that the city owned, and we rented that and the second floor and set up in our office. Before that, in this house, I had a Xerox machine in the front entranceway when you came. I had 2 desks here for 2 people that did the work during the day. The emergency line or AIDS line was my phone, same phone number actually that I have right now, kind of thing in that as well. And so with that, we were then able to move to a space downtown and start to operate that we rented from the city, and we're there for I think a year or 2, and then we moved to another big space that we had as well, as that. And by that point, we did have some paid staff. We were involved with advocating for funding from the in getting some money. We knew we needed more, and that meant advocating with the public. And so we became very good at pushing in the general public and the politicians to move. And the attitude in the public had started to change quite dramatically as AIDS was around and Ross Armstrong and the rest. And that people recognized in Edmonton this was a real disease. People were dying, and there needed to be health and other kinds of services involved. And with that, the province the province provided money for 3 years, I think it was, to ourselves, as well as Calgary by that point as well. And that some of that money came to us, our organization. It still funds the HIV Edmonton today. There's always more to say, but we're done with part one. There'll be a part two. We'll move on.